G'day, welcome back to the channel. Today we're brewing up an extra pale ale, and that is my very own Doghouse XPA. But instead of chilling it down, we're using a no-chill method to lock in that hop character without messing around with a chiller. Look, this is a super easy way to fit a brew day into a busy schedule, and I'll walk you through the whole process from mash in to getting it into your cube. If you're new here, by the way, my name's Harry and I make practical home brewing content to help you make the best beer you possibly can without all of the BS. Busy afternoon this afternoon, so let's dive into it. There we are, heaps better. Let's get this party started. So this XPA, it's designed to be a hoppy pale ale with a crisp finish starting at 5.3% ABV and 34 IBUs. So there's plenty of hop character there without it being completely over the top. Let's have a look at the grain bill. It's got 8.45 kilos of Bradfield American ale malt, and that is your base malt. Then it's got a kilo of wheat malt for that body and head retention, 820 grams of Vienna malt, and that just adds a little bit of that extra malty complexity. For hops, we're going with the classic trio, Amarillo, Citra and Centennial. The main additions are in that late hop stand at 85 degrees Celsius and a dry hop on day 4 to really punch home that hop aroma. Now, I'll give you some advice. When you're designing a beer, it should have no more than about 3, maybe 4 malts, and you have to know what each of them is going to bring to the brew. Look, I see recipes online all the time with 5, 6, sometimes 7 or 8 malts, and you have to wonder sometimes what people are thinking when they write these recipes. You don't have to create the works burger of malt bills to make a really good beer. Speaking of works burgers, for those of you that are in the US, beetroot is a thing on hamburgers, and so is pineapple. And you know what? You can't change my mind. Now that's my recipe, and it might not suit you. And that's cool, we can still be mates. Now, if you're looking to modify one of your own recipes to convert it over to no-chill, the rule of thumb is to simply add 20 minutes to your hop additions. So your 60-minute hop additions become your 40 minutes become your 20-minute additions, and so on. Now, what about flame out hops, I hear you ask? Well, I'm glad you asked, because you've got a couple of choices. You can either do a Whirlpool at 85 degrees Celsius, or you can move them over into the cubes directly, but there's a catch there. The environment and where you live can end up with different results, because those cubes can cool down at different rates depending on what time of the year it is. I like to use a Whirlpool and put them in these hop tea balls.
You're breaking my balls here, You're breaking my balls.
That way they can be lifted out and don't get left behind, so you don't pick up any of that grassy vegetal character that you might get from long-term exposure to the wort. For this beer, I really like Y Yeast 1272 American Ale 2, but since I'm saving a few bucks, this batch will actually be fermented with the harvested BRY 97 from another brew, but that's for the next video. Now, as part of our preparation this morning before I left for work, I pre-boiled all of our liquor. So I pre-boiled our strike water as well as our sparge water for 15 minutes, let it cool down to 90 degrees and then cling wrapped it. And I only unwrapped it this afternoon when I started heating it up to minimise that exposure and that reabsorption of oxygen. All right, let's get this mash started. The brow's just come up to temperature. We're going with a simple high fermentability mash in order to keep this beer crisp and dry. And what that looks like is 65 degrees Celsius for 60 minutes. That's for max fermentability. And then a 75 to 78 degree mash out for about 10 minutes. And that just helps with lautering. Look, I always pre-adjust my water to the local water profile. This batch is built around Townsville water, so I've added calcium chloride and gypsum and phosphoric acid to balance the pH and also to adjust that sulphite to chloride ratio. And that's what our crush looks like there. There's not a lot of flour, and I've also purged that with CO2. I've just left a tube from my CO2 tank, pushed it all the way to the bottom and just blew some CO2 over it and then sealed it up. I've also used 2 Camden tablets inside our 50 litre Braumeister, as well as 1 Camden tablet inside our sparge water heater, just to scavenge any of that additional oxygen when we're mashing in. Righto, so malt pipe in. We'll just make sure that that's seated properly. Bottom screens. We'll just come in with our mash paddle and make sure that that bottom fine screen's seated all the way. Now when we're adding our malt, we just want to do it as gently as possible without too much splashing. So I think we're all good there. Let's get the top screen on and the LoDO. So how the LoDO kit works, you've got a support ring and then you just put your fine and your coarse filter plate on top of it like that. We forgo the hold down bar itself and they provide you with a modified threaded piece of tubing. Now that acts as a hold down, and then you've got a swimmer lid which sits on top of the actual malt pipe itself to minimise that exposure to oxygen. So we'll get it started and then we'll top it up so that this lid will swim on top because we're not going to be sparging today. And we just want to cover that filter plate and come in and put our floating lid on. And of course, we'll then put our regular lid on the Braumeister. Now that we've mashed in, what I've done is I've just got CO2 from my tank, just purging that headspace in that Braumeister just to drive off any of that additional oxygen that may have got in there. And we'll just gently close that up and that should form a blanket on top of that malt while it mashes. There you go, that's our pH 5.5. I was aiming for about 5.4. I'm just up a little bit, that's okay. It's probably something to do with the rain event that we've been having. You can see it's just bobbing down below 5.5 now. I put these shot glasses in the freezer. It just helps bring the temperature of the sample down. I know these are meant to be auto temperature calibrating, but I like to take my samples at room temperature. There you can go, 5.48, close enough for government work. Now, I feel like I need to add something here. Look, unless you're deliberately setting about to do a low dissolved oxygen beer, there's no need to go to all the extreme measures that I've gone to, i.e. purging your grains after they've been milled, pre-boiling your liquor, purging the headspace of your Braumeister or whatever vessel you're using to mash in. That's simply not required at all. I'm doing it with this beer because I know that the hops will fade over time if I don't. That's the one disadvantage I've found with brewing no-chill with particularly hoppy beers. Righto, so that's the end of our mash. All right, so we're going to lift the malt pipe out. Yeah, righto, so hopefully you can see. I'm just going to lift the lid off. We'll put that over here. All right. We'll lift our floating plate off. Get rid of that over here as well. Now, we want to lift this malt pipe up as gently as we can. And to do that, we're going to need, firstly, our staple. And our lifting hook. And I'll set the strap up and we'll get into that. Righto, so I've just lifted that malt pipe up, and that whole time I've had just CO2 just blowing over the surface of the wort just to shield it from any oxygen pickup that might have occurred while we were lautering. Now we're not sparging, so I can get the lid on this thing now and get on with the boil. Now before we put the boil hood on, we're just going to add our firm cap nice and early. Now that firm cap's in there, we shouldn't have any problems with it boiling over. So we'll just leave our hood on and just get it up to the boil and in with our 60-minute hops. So there we go, we're all cleaned up. That's our grains. They'll head off down to the chooks in the morning. And our malt pipe and our LoDO kit's all cleaned up. It's important that you keep on top of the cleaning so you don't end up with a massive cleaning job at the end. Nothing will stop you brewing all grain during the week quicker than that. And there's our pre-boil gravity there, 1.045, not too bad. Now that we've hit our pre-boil volume, it's time for the boil and the hops. At 60 minutes, I'm going to add 23.7 grams of Amarillo. That'll give us 12 IBUs, just enough for balance. At 10 minutes, we'll hit it with 35 grams of Amarillo for 8 IBU, and that'll start layering in the citrus. And then it'll be time for our hop stand at 85 for 15 minutes. And then we'll hit it with 68.5 grams of Citra for 7 IBU, 40 grams of Amarillo, 40 grams of Centennial. Hop stands work perfectly with no-chill because they let you lock in the hop aroma without losing it to high temps. Hey, sorry to interrupt the brew day, but we need a word for our sponsor, and that's me. Hey, listen, YouTube analytics is telling me that over 85% of you guys watching this video right now aren't subscribed. So if you're getting value out of these videos, consider hitting the subscribe button and ringing the little bell icon. That way, you'll know when I've got a new video ready for you, and it'll really help the channel out. Well, that's enough from our sponsor for today. Let's get back into the brew.
It was bad. It was awful. It was terrible. Hey, boom!
And while that's cooling down, we'll just come in with some alfoil over the top of our lid there, just to stop anything dropping in there. Righto, so we're at 85 degrees. I'm just going to lift this lid off and come in just quickly.
I've got balls of steel.
We're just going to put those T-balls in and just hook them on the side there.
I like you. You have balls. I like balls.
And we'll turn our pump on.
Much later.
Righto, so that's our 15-minute hop stand done. I'm going to get these hops out and we're just going to whirlpool it. Come in, pump some more CO2 over the top, and then we'll let it settle for another 15 minutes.
A little longer than a few minutes later.
Righto, let's get this thing cubed. So the first thing we'll do is we'll get rid of this blanking plug. Come up and fit our triclover. And again, we want that out of the way with the butterfly valve. So that triclover can just, I can get it on. Come over this way. Open our first cube, lid into there. Now give ourselves a little bit of space. Yeah, you can see what's going on. Again, you're going to put your hoof up underneath that, make that the tallest part of the cube. Cubes have been purged with CO2. They've had star sand through them, and they've also got a Camden tablet in the bottom of them to scavenge that last little bit of oxygen. Let me just get underneath this one. Come in, put the lid on the cube just going to push down. Get that first one tightened by hand. Next cube, we'll just repeat that process. Now what we're going to do is come in with our cube spanner and just make sure that those lids are on tight enough. And you just want to quarter of a turn them. That's them there. You'll definitely feel when you've got enough tension on the cube lid. Be careful you don't over tighten them because you can cross thread them. Now what we're going to do is just flip those cubes over on their sides to get the heat up into these handles. And again, if you end up with a bit of an air bubble, don't stress, because that'll shrink as that cube contracts. And that's what we're left with in the bottom of the kettle. Just all that protein and stuff, not a lot of hops to clean up. And that'll take us about 10 or 15 minutes. We'll just let everything cool down first though. So after about 10 minutes and a bit of hot PBW, that's our Braumeister all cleaned up. We're ready to go for next time. So that's another successful brew day done. We've got our XPA sitting over there in those couple of cubes, and that's ready to ferment when I get back. Look, if you've ever thought about no-chill brewing, give it a go. It's a game changer for brewing on a busy schedule. Up next, I'll be racking my Anzac biscuit ale and harvesting the yeast. Hey, if you haven't seen that video, I'll link to it up here. Then we'll be getting this XPA into a fermenter and using that repitched BRY 97 to save some bucks. If you want to see how to reuse yeast properly and save some cash, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out. Look, thanks for watching, and remember, life's too short to drink dodgy beers, so get out there and brew one yourself. I'll catch you on the next one. Cheers. Oh yeah.